If you're frightened of dying and you're holding on, you'll see devils tearing your life away. But if you've made your peace, then the devils are really angels.
I want to share a story that occurred over a period of a year of my school career, my 8th grade year to be exact. I'd like to preface this by saying that I'm a male and bisexual as well, as only being 13 when this first started, so some of the decisions I made throughout this whole thing were pretty stupid on my part. Let's travel back in time to when my troubles started, the beginning of 8th grade, the year prepping me for what was to come in my high school career. I was excited for this year, especially when I found out that a new kid was joining my class. We'll call him Liam. Liam was a tall, skinny 15-year-old boy with black curly hair and blue eyes. He also enjoyed the same interests I had at the time: gorillas, Steven Universe, drawing, all that jazz. As a hormone-filled 13-year-old who had just discovered his sexuality, I was immediately head over heels for him. But due to the fact that I go to a religious school, I knew I couldn't openly date him without getting into deep trouble. I had to suppress my feelings for him, which turned out to be a massive bullet dodge. I became friends with Liam, and we talked every day we got the chance to. During lunch, during class, even at home on Instagram. He was perfect for me. He was so easy to talk to, and he was hilarious and just an all-around down-to-earth guy. 2 weeks after 8th grade, we were scheduled to go on a field trip, and Liam sat next to me on the bus. And that was when it all really started, when his veil of who he really was began to slowly lift. The trip was a 3-hour journey to a museum, and I thought it would be great because of who I would get to spend my time with. The first half hour or so was great. We did our usual session of talking and joking with each other, when all of a sudden, he began to stroke my knees. I have very sensitive knees, so it tickled, and laughing, I told him to stop because it tickled so bad. He then moved his hand up to my thigh and rubbed that instead. And part of me was a bit uncomfortable with this, but at the same time, I was a dumb 13-year-old that really liked this boy, and I wanted him to like me back, so I chose to not say anything or move seats. He did the same thing when we were going back to the school after the trip, and I regret not saying anything because maybe that could have saved me from a year of hell from this guy. Cut to around 3 weeks after this experience, Liam and I were chilling in the gym before PE, and he asked me to hold on to his phone as his shorts didn't have pockets. I happily obliged and stuck the phone in my pocket, and during our lap runs I had to use the restroom, so I excused myself to the restroom to do my business. While inside, I remembered that I had Liam's phone, and I was feeling a little nosy, so I decided to snoop and see what juicy secrets I could find out about my crush. He didn't have a password, so it was easy to access whatever I wanted, and I decided to look into his gallery, and what I found took me aback. There were around 250 pictures of me in his camera roll. All just of me, in class, during the trip, me and him, and some I had known he had taken, others I did not. I thought this was creepy, but at the same time, stupid 13-year-old me was happy that Liam liked me enough to be the center of his photography. So like his creepy actions before, I brushed this off. As the weeks went on, I noticed that Liam not only liked me, but was obsessed with me. It started off with me noticing small things, like he wore the same color and brand of shoes I wore, and then turned into more specific things like t-shirts with specific brands and characters that I wore. I was more flattered than creeped out at his actions and again, brushed them off. It was in December of 2016 when I realized that what he was doing was creepy and disturbing. It was after school and my mother was running late, so Liam and I were chilling in one of the empty classrooms waiting on our parents. Liam's mother always worked a little late, so he always left school a little bit later than everyone else. And I was sitting in the front of the classroom, and Liam sat in the back. He had sat his bag down next to the classroom door, and since I was closer to the bag, he asked me to get a book from it. I said sure and walked over towards it. As I bent over to reach inside the bag, Liam walked behind me and grabbed my butt with both of his hands. Startled, I turned around and asked him what he was doing, and he simply said that he was just goofing and wanted to mess with me. I had blown everything else off before, the pictures, the touching of my legs, but I knew that gripping my butt like that was not okay. I was uncomfortable now, and I decided that I didn't want to be there with him anymore after that, and I decided to leave. He didn't follow me out and just sat with a blank face after I left the classroom. I reported what he did to the principal on the way out, but he didn't believe me, saying that I was just trying to start trouble, but would still talk to him about it. So, yeah, great school system there. The next day, I walked into class as usual, and Liam was sitting in the back, saving his usual spot next to him for me. But he had a cold, dead look in his eyes when he stared at me. I reluctantly sat down next to him and gave him a monotone, "Hey," but he said nothing in return. A few minutes went by in silence between us, and other than the other kids having their own conversations or doing their own activities, when Liam leaned over and whispered to me. What he whispered to me made my blood freeze, and there were words I'll never forget. "You really tried to report me? I thought we had something. I'm going to make your life hell, you little cunt." And make my life hell, he surely did. Every day for weeks on end, he would find a way to get to me and do whatever he wanted. He would manage to find times when I was alone and touch me, hurt me, or even worse. Even when crowded in the halls, he would do things like give a subtle butt grab where no one could see it. And it got so bad that I stopped going to the bathroom at all during school hours. I tried to report him, but no one would believe me, saying that he was an exemplary student and wouldn't dare do something like that. I went home every day with a bruise and mental scarring, but I never told my parents in fear of them just automatically thinking that I was doing it for attention. One time, when I went to my locker, I opened it and a note fell out. I picked it up and opened it, and its contents made me physically ill. It was a typed letter from Liam, detailing all of the disgusting and heinous acts he wanted to do to me. I tried to show it to the principal, believing that the letter would prove what Liam had done, but he said since the letter had been typed and wasn't signed by Liam, there was no proof that Liam had typed it, and even suggested I was the one who typed it, in an attempt to frame Liam for something he didn't do. All of my efforts to stop him were futile. I wasn't a violent person, so fighting him wasn't an option. Liam was a psychopathic monster, but he was smart. He managed to create a facade that he only broke when tormenting me. He was a star student as well as a rather popular guy in our class, and compare that to me, an antisocial, somewhat rude and unpopular guy. He basically had the perfect target. Around February of 2017, my history teacher was fired for a different scandal involving voyeurism that I had no involvement with, and he was replaced by a new teacher who I'll refer to as Mrs. Bennett. Mrs. Bennett was a wonderful young woman who managed to make her teaching fun and interesting, and was the only person who got me through this tough time with Liam. Mrs. Bennett took a liking to me because of my diligence and hard work I did during class, and she noticed I always looked tired or sad whenever I walked by or leaving. So one day, as class ended, she pulled me aside and asked why I always looked so sad and tired during class. I was rather hesitant to say anything because I was worried that, like everyone else, she wouldn't believe me. But she seemed to genuinely care enough about me if she pulled me aside to privately talk to me. So I decided to tell her everything, what had happened over the past year, how it all started, and how it was now. She stared at me, eyes wide and jaw dropped, listening to all of the abuse this monster had given me, and how the school did nothing to stop it. She gave me a warm hug and apologized profusely for what happened to me, and said that somehow, something would be done to stop it. I told her that I didn't want her to say anything to the higher-ups because I knew she could get in trouble, because Liam could manipulate the situation into his favor. She said to not worry and that she wouldn't allow me to be hurt anymore. and I left that classroom feeling happy for the first time in a while, knowing that someone finally believed me for what he was doing to me. I felt like I had sort of a guardian angel. Mrs. Bennett kept her word on keeping me safe. She kept a close eye on me between classes, always dismissing her classes 5 minutes in advance so she could walk close to my classroom and keep a close eye on me as I walked through the halls. Liam caught on to this and stopped touching me as he noticed Mrs. Bennett always eyeing him and I through the hall. I went to Mrs. Bennett's room after school whenever my mother was late, so that Liam couldn't touch or harm me after school either. I thought it was all over. But there was one last time that Liam tried to commit his sinister acts. It was around the end of April, and Liam hadn't attacked me or touched me since February, and I was resting easy, knowing that Mrs. Bennett was protecting me from his dirty, vile clutches. I was sitting in her classroom after school, and strangely, I didn't see Liam at all even though he was at school earlier, so I figured he checked out early. Mrs. Bennett said she needed to run and collect copies of a test from the teacher's lounge, which was all the way on the other side of the school from the room we were in. After she left, I needed to use the restroom, which was in the opposite direction of the teacher's lounge. I started walking to the restroom, passing all of the empty classrooms on either side of me, when I thought I heard footsteps behind me. I was still a bit nervous about Liam. I turned around and saw nobody in sight, and I figured my mind was playing tricks on me, so I walked another 50 feet to the restroom and used the stall. While inside, I heard the door to the restroom open, so I figured it was just another teacher staying late, needing to use it. But then the lights switched off. The power didn't go out. It was switched off because I heard the light switch click. I was petrified as I sat in total blackness, but this didn't even compare to what happened next. I heard the voice of Liam say in a sing-songy voice, "Come out, little bitch. I've missed using you." I was on the verge of tears at this point, but dared not make a sound as I heard him slowly walking through the bathroom. I was in the last stall at the end, and to my horror, he began checking the stalls, trying to find me. And after snapping out of my frozen fear, I prepared for him to open the door to my stall. He knew that I was in that last stall, laughing and taunting me while standing on the other side of the stall door, which was his biggest mistake. I bowed my legs back, and as soon as he opened the door, I kicked the door back in his face with full force. I heard him yell in pain and fall backward from the impact, and I took this time to pull up my pants and run out of the restroom with him following close behind. As soon as I burst out of the restroom, Liam burst out right behind me and tackled me to the floor. He had a large pocket knife in his hand and successfully slashed me a few times on my arm and hands. I heard Mrs. Bennett yell, "Hey, get the hell off of him!" and ran over to tackle Liam to the ground, wrestling the knife out of his hand. At this point, other teachers who hadn't left the building had come outside to see what the commotion was, and Mrs. Bennett was screaming for teachers to call 911 while I was lying on the hallway floor, sobbing profusely, and my arms in a bloody mess. The police came and arrested Liam, and I was taken to hospital in an ambulance. My parents were notified, and they showed up at the hospital in hysterics over what had happened to me. After my wounds were stitched up and I rested for a while, my parents came in hugging me, asking what happened. So I explained to them what had been going on the past school year, and they were both crying and apologizing profusely for not noticing that something was wrong sooner. I also got a written apology from the school principal, basically asking me not to sue, but I didn't care about that anymore. The important thing was that this sick freak was caught and couldn't harm me or anyone else. As for Liam, he was sent to a mental institution, and as far as I know, he's still there today. I'm now 16 years old and changed forever because of what that monster put me through. I've taken jujitsu, and I'm also carrying a pocket knife with me wherever I go. I consider Mrs. Bennett a savior because if it weren't for her, I most likely wouldn't be alive or would have continued to endure Liam's torture. And for what she did, I'll always be thankful for her. And Liam, you sick bastard, For your sake, I hope we never meet again. I was 16 years old when this happened, and I was living with my aunt. My first encounter with the little girl took place in broad daylight while I was conversing with my aunt. The two of us were standing there looking out the picture window, overlooking the vacant lot, and immersed in conversation, when I happened to notice a girl around the age of 10 or so, just standing there at the edge of this lot, staring at us. Normally, I wouldn't have paid much attention to this, seeing as my aunt lived in a pretty populated neighborhood. However, this child was wearing a nightgown, and it was mid-afternoon, and she was filthy, and the nightgown was tattered. Her hair was very matted, and her face looked as though she hadn't bathed in some time. I quickly drew my aunt's attention to this girl and asked if she could see her, and my aunt just stood there, her mouth agape, and stared at her. The only words to come out of her mouth were, "Poor kid. I wonder if she's lost. I don't recognize her from around here." At that moment, my aunt headed towards the phone to call the police, hoping to help get the child back to her home. But as my aunt picked up the telephone, I watched this girl kind of give a smile and go running into the vacant lot, and then vanish. I couldn't believe what I had just seen, and stood there for a few moments searching for a sign of her. But she had vanished. My aunt hung up the phone and tried to act as though it had never happened, and when I questioned her whether or not she had seen the girl vanish, she simply said, "What girl?" A few days later, I was again in the area of the house looking out the same window, thinking of the little girl, and there she was. Except this time she was standing in the lot just on the other side of the fence, smiling at me. Her smile made me feel uneasy, and after she and I just stood there looking at each other for what seemed like an eternity, I decided I would go outside and confront her. I made my way to the road and entered the lot, and as I approached the child, she gave me a little giggle and once again took off running. I watched her dart off through the lot and then vanish at a group of bushes. I was determined to get to the bottom of this, so I walked over to the bushes, believing I would find her hiding amongst them. Instead, there was nothing. No sign of the girl. But however, in the middle of this group of bushes was a small clearing, and something urged me, or rather drove me, to pick up a stick and dig at this said clearing. So, with stick in hand, I began digging away at the soil, and after quite a while the stick got stuck in something, and I pulled at whatever it was. I pulled an object out of the ground, and I noticed it was a piece of fabric. It suddenly dawned on me that this scrap of material looked identical to the little girl's nightgown. Chills filled my body, and I immediately dropped the stick and fabric and went running back into the house. I knew that that little girl had been trying to tell us something at this point, and probably should have gone to the authorities and reported what I had found, but because of where I was in my life at the time, I didn't know how to handle it and decided to just let it go, and that was a bad decision. It was then that the little girl started tormenting me. My bedroom was adjacent to the area where I discovered the piece of her nightgown, and it was just on the other side of the fence. That night that I found it, I was sitting up late in my bedroom with only a candle for light, doing teenager things, just listening to music. And then I heard the giggling. So I turned down my music to get a better listen to this laughter. And I heard it. It was the same giggle she had let out on my second run-in with her. It sounded as though she was right there in the room with me. So I got up and began to look around until I fixed my eyes upon the bedroom window. And there she was, just staring in at me with that same unsettling grin and giggling away. She must have been floating or something, because this bedroom was a good distance from the ground, and she was just a small child. We looked at one another for a short time, and I decided that she was not going to get to me. So I pushed a big armoire in front of the window to block her from peeking in. I then proceeded to return back to what I had been doing before she had interrupted me. I sat back down on the floor, still with only a candle as my only light, and I turned the volume on my tunes back up, hoping to drown out her giggles. This angered her as the giggles became louder and seemed to echo throughout the room from every corner. I just tried like hell to ignore her, but it seemed the more I tried, the more she tried. It was when she began to scratch and tap at the window that I had had enough and thought that if I went to bed and fell asleep, she would give up. And eventually, I did pass out with the orchestra of sounds to lull me to sleep. I woke up the next morning feeling like I had been through the ringer, especially my abdominal area. I was and always have been a sound sleeper, so I can sleep through anything. Not very safe, I know. But when I lifted up my t-shirt, I noticed a long and deep scratch, the size of a small fingernail. I knew right then and there I was in trouble, and that she meant me harm. For the remainder of my stay at my aunt's house, I began sleeping in the living room and didn't have any more occurrences. I ended up moving out abruptly and never looked back. But to this day, I think about that little girl and wonder whether or not she was ever laid to rest.